What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G and the Cricket Innovate E5G. Now, as always, if you end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But without further ado, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, we're getting a 6.4-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 403, and a 19.5:9 aspect ratio. With the Cricket Innovate E5G, we're getting a slightly larger 6.6-inch LCD display. This phone has a 720p resolution, a PPI of 269, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So, on one hand, with the Cricket Innovate E5G at 6.6 inches with a 20:9 aspect ratio, versus again 6.4 inches with a 19.5:9 aspect ratio, the Cricket Innovate E5G is a tiny bit larger, and it has a slightly taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're maybe doing a bit more reading and stuff like that, where maybe the image quality isn't super important, but maybe you want things to be a bit larger and easier to see, then the Innovate E5G might have a slight advantage. But of course, with the A54 5G, the image quality on this phone is so much better. So if you're consuming a lot of content like watching videos, for example, where the image quality is a bit more important, then definitely keep this in mind. Because with the A54 5G, not only are we getting a much sharper image with again a 1080p resolution versus 720p with the Cricket, but with a Super AMOLED versus an LCD, the colors are richer and more vibrant, the display is brighter, and the viewing angles are quite a bit better. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, the A54 5G will be a lot easier to see. So overall, while again the Cricket Innovate E5G has a slight advantage when it comes to size and dimensions, because the image quality with the A54 is on a completely different level, I would say the A54 5G has the overall better display here. Now for storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we're getting 64GB with microSD card expansion as well. So clearly here, the Samsung has a huge advantage, having double the storage of the Cricket, but at the same time, if you're more of a light user, if you're really just not doing a whole lot with your phone, then keep in mind, 64GB, while definitely not being the best, is still at least acceptable. So again, if you are more of a light user, even with 64GB, you most likely will get by just fine. But of course, if storage is more of a priority for you, then definitely go with the A54 5G because again, with 128GB, this phone has double the storage of the Cricket Innovate E5G, so definitely a big advantage. For security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners too. With the A54 5G, it's in the display, so definitely a nice premium look, and with the Cricket Innovate E5G, it's on the back. But starting with the Samsung, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Innovate E5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the A54 5G, up front, we get a nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup, with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. For video, this phone can record 4K videos in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely great to see there. With the Cricket Innovate E5G, up front, we got a water drop notch for the selfie camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. And then for video, this phone does have a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here. So in general, in pretty much every way, the camera features with the A54 5G are quite a bit better. This phone has both an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. It can record 4K videos, and in case you're wondering, with this phone, the depth sensing camera is basically built into the main camera, so portrait mode still works perfectly fine. On the other hand, with the Cricket Innovate E5G, again, this phone can't record 4K videos, and the camera setup itself is honestly relatively featureless. No ultra wide camera, no macro camera, and in general, compared to the A54, with the Cricket Innovate E5G, the overall photo quality is definitely not nearly as good. To give you an idea of what these cameras can do, first, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, and for what it is, definitely great quality here. For the average user, I do think you will get a good experience overall. Sure, if you compare it to maybe a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, for example, that's a bit of a step up, it's not going to be quite at that level, but at the same time, for casual use, if you're taking maybe the occasional Instagram photo every now and then and stuff like that, the photo quality we get with the A54 5G will be plenty good enough. So in general, unless you're really into mobile photography, in which case you might be able to justify spending spending a bit more and getting something higher end in general. For everyone else, for more normal everyday use, the A54 5G will be just fine. And then here's some pictures taken with the Cricket Innovate E5G, and on one hand, I actually don't think this phone has a bad camera. In fact, for more casual light users, this actually might be all you really need. On one hand, if you compare it to the A54 5G, I do think the Samsung is quite a bit better. So if you're maybe taking a lot of Instagram photos, for example, then I would go with the A54 5G. But at the same time, this phone is definitely capable of taking some decent pictures. And if you really only need your camera every now and then, I do think the Cricket Innovate E5G will get the job done just fine. But of course, if you want the better camera setup between the two, including features and photo quality, the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G will be a much better choice. Now for the RAM and processor, with the A54 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Exynos 1380 processor. With the Cricket Innovate E5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700. So in general, on one hand, the Innovate E5G is definitely not a slow phone, and for more basic activities, stuff like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe even some light mobile gaming, this phone will get the job done just fine. But between the two, the A54 5G is quite a bit faster. So if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, maybe doing more demanding activities, definitely keep this in mind. Now I ran a benchmark test on each phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So again, as you can see, there definitely is a pretty significant difference between the two, with the A54 5G scoring quite a bit higher. So again, if you want the faster phone between the two, you will want to go with the A54 5G. But again, in my experience, the Cricket Innovate E5G, despite not being nearly as fast, is still definitely not a slow phone, and in general, for more light use, you will still get a pretty good experience. Now for the batteries, with the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25W fast charging, and with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10W fast charging. So first of all, when it comes to charging speed, the A54 5G will have a huge advantage, because honestly 10W fast charging is barely even fast charging. But also keep in mind, in order to actually take full advantage of the A54 5G's charging speed, you will need a 25W charger, which unfortunately this phone does not come with. Aside from charging speed, with a 5000 mAh battery compared to only 4000 with the Innovate E5G, the Samsung will have much better battery life. So if you're not always around a charger, but you still need to use your phone all day, the A54 5G will be quite a bit better for that. And of course, down the road as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, with the Samsung, since the battery is significantly larger, you're not going to notice it nearly as quickly as you will with the Cricket Innovate E5G. So if you're someone who likes to keep one phone for a longer time without having to replace it, the Samsung will have an advantage there too. For the software, the A54 5G does have Android 13, whereas unfortunately, with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we are only getting Android 12. In addition to this, I'm pretty sure the Cricket Innovate E5G will never get any kind of major update, whereas with the A54 5G, not only did this phone come with Android 13, but with Samsung software support, you can also expect to get Android 14, 15, 16, and 17. So in general, if the software is important to you, the A54 5G will be a much better choice. When it comes to other features, both phones do have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you won't have to worry about that. And this was actually pleasantly surprising with the Cricket Innovate E5G, because when it comes to phones like this that are really low-end entry-level carrier branded devices, I want to say most of them don't have NFC. But again, the Cricket Innovate E5G does actually have this feature, so definitely great to see there. And another thing I do want to point out here is that with the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, unfortunately this phone does not have a headphone jack, whereas the Cricket Innovate E5G does. So if you have a pair of 3.5mm headphones you want to use, keep in mind you can use them normally with the Cricket Innovate E5G, but with the Samsung, you will need an adapter. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, in pretty much every way, the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G is a much better device, but considering this phone is like over double the price of the Cricket Innovate E5G, this is probably not surprising. But aside from this, there are a couple things to think about here. First of all, again, the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G is better in pretty much every way. The display is quite a bit better, it has more storage, faster performance, a much better camera, a larger battery, and better software support. But in general, if you're really just looking for a super affordable basic phone for more basic activities, if you're really just doing some light web browsing and social media, streaming content like videos and music, maybe playing a really simple game or two every now and then, but you're really not going to be using your phone a ton, despite the A54 5G being better. In that kind of situation, for really light casual users, the Cricket Innovate E5G is probably all you're going to need. Another thing to keep in mind is that Cricket does have deals from time to time, and they do change quite a bit, and there might be a situation where maybe the Cricket Innovate E5G is full price, which is about $159, and the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G is going for like less than $200, $100. In that case where the phones are a pretty similar price, I would definitely go for the A54 5G because in general, even at full price, the actual value you're getting for the money with the A54 5G is just so much better. The phone not only has better features and performance, but it's just better built overall. So if you really do want to maximize the value you're getting for the money, I would go with the A54 5G. But if you really just need something basic to get the job done, and you don't really care about the extra features and performance, the Cricket Innovate E5G will still be a perfectly fine choice. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G and the Cricket Innovate E5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.